Hey guys, this is our second big punctuation review, me talking really fast, you filling in the blanks as we go along so that you're actually paying attention to all this talking I'm doing. So there's still some quote stuff I want to talk about, so let's just get through the rest of the quote stuff. So I want to talk about how do I introduce quotes. So I told you in your video yesterday that you must introduce quotes, they can't stand alone. But I didn't really review how to do that. So I just want to hit on that right now. So, the comma mark is the most common, is the mark most commonly used to introduce quotes. So this is what you will usually use. So, 9 times out of 10, use a comma, it's probably right. All right, so for example, the flight attendant asked, "May I see your boarding pass?" Buddha says, "Even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely." Notice that most of the time we'll have the comma after words like asked, says, repeated, yelled. So some kind of speaking word or wrote, right, if you're talking about what someone wrote. So with some kind of introductory word like that. Now, a colon should be used when the text introducing the quote could stand as a complete sentence on its own. So it's also what we use to introduce really long quotations, right? We talked about that block text, how you would use a colon to introduce your really long, more than 4 lines quotes. So really long quotations or when it's a complete sentence. All right, no punctuation. When the quoted material is very short and flows directly from your introductory text, so it fits nicely in the sentence, no pauses needed or anything like that, no punctuation needs to be used before the quotation. So some examples in her closing statement: the prosecutor spoke forcefully of the defendant's callous disregard for human life. Soon after Algernon's death, Charlie begins to experience what he refers to as the burnout. Okay, so notice both of these, they were short phrases. They flowed in with the sentence. You don't need punctuation to set off quotes like that. Okay. Now, sometimes you don't introduce the quote. Sometimes you put the quote first, which is fine, but you still have to explain where it came from. But in this situation, whatever punctuation comes at the end of the quote, just change it into a comma and then put your little, so and so right or so and so says or so and so yelled. Okay. All right. So that's it for quotes. Other punctuation. Commas, the one we struggle with the most because commas do lots and lots of different things. So we're usually either not putting them where they're supposed to be or we're putting them all over the place. And we don't really want to do either of those things. So let's talk about the situation where you use commas. All right, the most common one that you've probably been hearing since you were in second grade, use them to separate items in a series. Okay, so for example, I went to the store to buy milk, bread, and eggs. Okay, I got 3 items here. I'm putting a comma between them. Okay. Now, separate 2 independent clauses with a fan voice conjunction. Those are coordinating conjunctions for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Durham County schools were closed, comma, but Triangle Day School was open. So when you're joining those independent clauses together, you need a comma coordinating conjunction in between them. Use commas to set off an introductory word, phrase, or dependent clause. So like transitional words at the beginning of your sentence, like however. If you have a phrase at the beginning, like in the summertime, or if you start with a dependent clause, like since I was out of food, I went to the store to buy milk, bread, and eggs. Any of those types of things need to have a comma after them. So any introductory word, phrases, dependent clause. All right, flipping over to the back. We also want to use commas to set off interruptions. So when we interrupt ourselves to add more information, we want to put commas around that. So for example, have you, by the way, ordered lunch yet? Okay, so I interrupted myself, so I'm putting that by the way there. Now, sometimes we'll have our relative clauses that are interruptions in our sentences. And remember, those are clauses that begin with words like who, which, and that. And these are actually dependent clauses that you're kind of sticking in the middle of the sentence somewhere. And when they're non-restrictive, which means non-essential, so I could take them out of the sentence and it wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence at all, you want to put commas around them. Because if it's something I could take out, I need to kind of set it off. Okay, so example, Mr. Brown, comma, who lives next door, comma, broke his leg yesterday. So my who lives next door, I could take that out of the sentence. It's added information. I want to set it off with commas. All right, we also use commas to separate coordinate adjectives. Just a reminder, coordinate adjectives are adjectives that can be separated by an and or swapped and still make sense. And we want to put a comma between those. So for example, the cheerful laughing girl ran across the playground. I could say the cheerful and laughing girl ran across the playground. I could say the laughing cheerful girl ran across the playground. That still makes sense, so I want a comma in between them. Okay. Just trying to think of an example where you wouldn't use a comma. If I said something like, let me think. If I said something like, I saw 2 red hens in the backyard, okay? I couldn't say I saw red 2 hens. That sounds weird. Or I saw 2 and red hens. That sounds weird. So even though 2 and red are both adjectives, you don't want to put a comma between them, okay? All right, colons. Colons can be used to, do you remember? Colons can be used to introduce lists. Hopefully that was the one you remembered because that's the most common use for them. It can be used to introduce lists and provide explanations. All right, now remember, colons should always come after complete sentences. It's the main way people misuse colons. So whether using them to introduce a quote, which we already talked about, or using them to introduce a list, or you're introducing an explanation, you need to make sure you have a complete sentence before your colon. All right, examples, I need 3 things at the store, colon, sugar, milk, and flour. The girl always seemed happy, colon, laughing, smiling, greeting everyone. So notice, both of these, I could put a period where the colon is, and the stuff that comes before the colon would be a complete sentence. Okay, the stuff after the colon doesn't need to be a complete sentence, just before. All right, dashes. So dashes can be used to set off added information. You can just say info if you want, or in place of a colon before lists and explanations. Okay, so why would I use a dash instead of commas or colons? We usually use dashes for emphasis. So if you put dashes around information you're adding, you want it to stand out. Or it just kind of has a more informal conversational tone than a colon. So for some examples, the old man, dash, who seemed helpless, dash, suddenly struck the attacker with his cane. So there's this contrast between the helpless old man and him beating someone off with his cane. So we put dashes to emphasize that. Or I was tired of the city and wanted to go somewhere wild, dash, somewhere untouched by humans. So there I'm introducing an explanation like I would with a colon, but you can use a dash instead. All right, parentheses can also be used for added information, but you'll use them more often when adding information that doesn't flow with the rest of the sentence. So it's kind of like out there, weird, doesn't quite fit. That's a good place to use a parentheses. So the day was unusually warm. It was only March, so we decided to go to the park. So again, I'm just kind of adding information. Hyphens. Use hyphens to create compound adjectives or nouns. You may also need to use hyphens when adding prefixes to words if the words is confusing without it. So a compound adjective or noun is when I make a new adjective or a new noun by putting a hyphen in between them. So examples, the blue-green water glittered in the sunlight. Blue and green, I combine them to make the compound adjective blue-green. So I put a hyphen in between them. I was called by a headhunter who was recruiting for a new job. I made a new compound noun there. That is a real compound noun that exists. I did not make that up. And I reread the book for the 5th time. So putting the 2 REs right next to each other can look a little confusing. So putting a hyphen after my prefix is helpful. Okay. Now remember, if it's a compound adjective, I don't have this on your sheet, but if it comes after the noun it's describing, you don't have to hyphenate them. Just a weird thing about English, among all the many weird things about English. Okay, so that was your very fast punctuation review. We're going to do some more practice with this tomorrow, and hopefully you'll have at least most of this in your head. Hopefully it's coming back from last year. All right.